Hey, I am Emma. This Reddit story made me reread it twice. Trust me, you'll see why. Let's start. I'm Myra, 30 years old, and 2 weeks ago at my birthday dinner, my mother gave me a gift I will remember forever. Picture this: 40 guests of 5-star restaurant, candles glowing on a cake. Then my mother grabs the mic and says, smiling, that I was adopted for tax benefits, that I was never really family, that 30 years of trying to belong meant nothing. My sister burst out laughing. My father would not even look at me, but what none of them knew was that I had an envelope in my purse, an envelope from my grandmother, and what was inside would make my mother run from her own party before the night was over. Before I continue, if you like stories like this, hit like and subscribe, only if you genuinely want to hear what happens next, and tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, let me take you back 1 month earlier to the phone call that changed everything. It was almost 8 on a Thursday, and I was still at my desk at Harrison & Cole Architecture reviewing blueprints for a renovation that would not matter in 48 hours. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, Boston area code. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Miss Anderson, a man asked, measured and professional. My name is Theodore Whitman. I was your grandmother's attorney. Grandma Grace had died 6 months ago, so why was her lawyer calling now? He said there was a matter he needed to discuss in person, and it involved documents my grandmother left specifically for me. He told me the estate was settled, but this was separate, and my grandmother left explicit instructions that no one else in my family should know about this conversation. My heart started pounding because Grandma Grace was the only person who ever made me feel like I was not an outsider. She squeezed my hand under the table at dinners, and once when I cried in her garden, she whispered, "You belong here more than you know. One day you will understand." I asked when we could meet, and he said tomorrow, 9 a.m., and he would text the address. That night, I went home to my cramped one-bedroom apartment, and my phone buzzed again. The family group chat. My mother, Patricia, wrote big news. We are throwing Myra a 30th birthday dinner at the Sterling Saturday the 15th, 7 p.m. Everyone is invited. I read it 3 times. The Sterling was one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, and my parents had never thrown me anything like that. For my 18th birthday, I got a grocery store cake and a card with nothing written inside, while my sister Jenna got a pool party with a DJ and a photographer. So why now? Why the sudden grand gesture? I typed, "Wow, thank you, I am so surprised." Patricia replied immediately, "You deserve it, sweetheart." She had never called me that before. I stared at the ceiling and felt that dangerous hope. Whisper, maybe she is finally trying, maybe this is different. The next morning, I sat across from Theodore Whitman in an office that smelled like leather and mahogany. He placed a large envelope on the desk. Cream-colored, sealed with wax, stamped with Grandma Grace's initials, G.A. He said she prepared it 5 years ago when she was healthy and of sound mind, and made him promise to deliver it only to me. Only after her passing, he said. Inside was a copy of her will, a personal letter, and a smaller sealed envelope she instructed me not to open unless absolutely necessary. He said she told him I would know when the time was right. I broke the seal and scanned the will until I found my name, and then I stopped breathing. It said, "I hereby bequeath the Anderson estate, along with all property and contents therein, to my granddaughter Myra Anderson, the Anderson estate, my grandmother's mansion, the house where every holiday happened, the house Patricia decorated like it already belonged to her." I whispered, "This cannot be right." He said it was entirely legal, witnessed and recorded, and the will goes public in 2 weeks. I asked why me, and he slid the personal letter to me. I read it at midnight in my dark apartment, and Grandma Grace's handwriting felt like home. She wrote that she loved me from the moment she first held me. Not because she had to, but because I was light in a family that forgot how to shine. She wrote that she watched Patricia diminish me for years, and she should have fought harder. And then she wrote the hardest part, that I was not a stranger adopted by chance, that I belonged to this family more deeply than anyone told me, that I was her blood, her real blood. And the small sealed envelope contained the full truth, documentation, proof, everything I would need when I was ready, but to open it only when I must. I read that line over and over, "You are my blood." But I was adopted. Patricia made sure I never forgot it. I looked at the smaller envelope, still sealed, only open when absolutely necessary, and I locked it in my safe that night. What I did not know was that Patricia had found out about the will, and she was furious later. I learned she told Jenna that the estate was left to me, and it would go public in 2 weeks, and they had to act now. Patricia said the birthday dinner would have 40 guests, everyone who mattered, and if they humiliated me publicly, I would be too ashamed to show my face again, and once I disappeared, Contesting the will would be easier. Jenna hesitated, but Patricia called me an adopted charity case and the hesitation died. 1 week before the party, I was at Nordstrom doing something I rarely did. Spending money on myself, buying a dress, because if my family was finally throwing me a real birthday dinner, I wanted to feel like I deserved to be there. A voice behind me said, "Emerald, it will bring out your eyes." I turned and saw Lucas Smith, my closest friend at work, and I laughed and asked if he was stalking me. He said I looked like I was overthinking, so I told him about the lawyer, about the will, about the letter. Lucas listened and said something I never forgot. "Myra, you have walked into that family's traps your whole life. If there is even a chance this party is another one, do not go in." Empty-handed that night, I laid everything out on my bed, the will, the letter, and the sealed envelope, and then I tucked the sealed envelope into my clutch, just in case. The sterling took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the Boston skyline glowing beyond the windows. A U-shaped banquet table filled the room, and at the center was my chair, wrapped in ribbon. 40 guests were already there. Patricia hugged me stiffly and smiled and said again, "You deserve it, sweetheart." My father, Richard, gave me a brief handshake and would not meet my eyes. Jenna did not even say hello. She stood in the corner, recording on her phone. Then I saw Aunt Helen, my father's sister, the only person besides Grandma Grace who ever defended me. She hugged me and whispered, "Whatever happens tonight, remember your grandmother would be proud," and my blood went cold before I could ask what she meant. Servers called everyone to their seats. Dinner was fine for a while and I almost relaxed. Then Patricia stood and walked to the podium and tapped the microphone, and the room went silent. She thanked everyone for coming and said we were celebrating someone special, that I was turning 30, applause and smiles, and then her tone shifted. She talked about my journey, where I came from, and everything the family did for me. She said they supported me through school and career and loved me like I was one of them. Like my stomach tightened. Then she paused and said it was time to be honest. I looked at my father and he stared at his plate. Aunt Helen half rose and said, "Patricia, do not." But Patricia ignored her and turned to me and said, "Myra, sweetheart, are you ready to hear the truth?" And then she announced I was not their biological daughter, that I was adopted, and she laughed and said tax benefits, that they did it for a deduction. Jenna burst out laughing. My father still would not look up, and Patricia said I was never really part of the family. I was a financial decision, and she waited for me to crumble. Instead, I felt the envelope in my clutch and heard Grandma Grace in my head, "Be brave, my darling girl." So I stood and let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to realize I was not crying. I thanked Patricia for her illuminating speech and said she was right. It was time for truth. Then I pulled out the cream envelope stamped GA and said she wanted this public before 40 witnesses, so we would do it properly. The room went still, and Aunt Helen gave me a tiny nod. I said 2 weeks ago, I received a call from Theodore Whitman, and he gave me documents my grandmother prepared 5 years ago, witnessed, recorded, legally binding. Patricia tried to stop me, but I said, this is exactly the place, because she made it. The place when she called me a tax write-off, and I opened the envelope and held up the will and said, "Grandma, Grace left me the Anderson estate, the house, the land." Everything, whispers, exploded. Patricia turned pale and said it was impossible, and I said it was entirely legal, and goes public in 2 weeks. Then I smiled softly and said the house was not even the most interesting part. I pulled out Grandma Grace's letter and read the line that changed everything. "You are my blood, my real blood." And Aunt Helen stood and said, "Marcus is Myra's father," and the room filled with confused voices. "Who is Marcus?" And Aunt Helen said, "Richard's older brother, who died when I was 2, that the family erased him, and that Grandma Grace begged Richard to take me in, to keep Marcus' child in the family." My mouth went dry and I looked at Richard and saw shame in his eyes, and I turned to Patricia and said, You knew I was family," and she did not deny it, and I said, "You made me feel like an outsider for 30 years when I had more right to be here than you ever did." Then I pulled out the smaller sealed envelope, and Patricia lunged forward, begging me not to. But I said privately, "Like you planned to humiliate me tonight. Like you planned to record it," and Jenna froze, and I broke the seal. Inside was a DNA test from when I was 2, and a photograph. I held up the test and said it confirmed I was Marcus' biological daughter, and then I read the line that made Patricia look like she might collapse. That Marcus was not biologically related to Harold Anderson, and Aunt Helen explained Grandma had Marcus before she married Harold, and Harold adopted him. I looked at Patricia and said, You married into this family and tried to steal an inheritance that is not yours by blood, and I held up the photograph of Marcus holding baby me and said, I am Grandma Grace's bloodline, and Patricia searched the room for allies and found none. Richard stood and said he was sorry that he watched Patricia tear me down for 30 years and said nothing. I told him quietly that he should have, and tears ran down his face. Then Patricia grabbed her bag and fled, heels clicking, and the door slammed. My mother ran from her own party and I did not follow. The room exhaled. Aunt Helen held me and whispered, your grandmother would be proud, and for the first time in 30 years I cried, not from humiliation, but from release. After that, the fallout came fast. Word spread, Patricia disappeared from her social circles, Jenna lost followers in days, Richard asked to meet and told me the truth about Marcus, how he was brilliant and creative and destroyed by addiction after an accident, how the family erased him instead of helping him. I did not forgive Richard right away, but I did not close the door either. I told him this might be a start, but he would have to earn it. 2 weeks later, I walked into the estate alone, and in Grandma Grace's closet, I found a box of photographs. Marcus smiling with paint-stained hands, Marcus holding newborn me like I was the best thing in his world, and on the back, Grandma Grace wrote, Marcus and Myra, my two greatest loves. I pressed the photo to my chest and sobbed, because for the first time, the house did not feel like a place I had to earn. It felt like home. I made boundaries. Patricia, no contact, attorneys only. Richard, limited contact, slow rebuilding. Jenna, wait and see. Aunt Helen, real family. And then I created the Marcus Anderson Memorial Scholarship to help foster kids who wanted to study art or architecture, because Marcus never got a second chance, but someone else could. At the first ceremony, a girl named Maya hugged me and whispered, thank you for making me feel like I matter. And I realized what Grandma Grace tried to teach me all along. You cannot force people to love you, and you cannot earn your worth by shrinking yourself, but you can build a life where you belong to yourself first. So if you are watching this and you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family or had to set boundaries that scared you, I want you to hear this. You do not need anyone's permission to belong. You never did. And if you stayed until the end, thank you. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I read every single one. See you in the next story. Hey, I am Emma. This Reddit story made me reread it twice. Trust me, you'll see why. Let's start.